part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
This is JD with the Fanfare Podcast. This is episode 5. We're doing a director profile on John Hughes. For those of you who've been following the podcast so far, we have touched on a few movies, doing some movie report cards with Chase. Today is going to be a little bit different, and I'm so excited to do this episode. So let's jump into this. I'm going to tell you a little bit about John Hughes, who we are profiling today, and then we'll get into it. So John Weldon Hughes Jr., more formally known as John Hughes, was an American filmmaker. Hughes began his career in 1970 as an author of humorous essays and stories for the National Lampoon magazine. He went on to Hollywood to write, produce, and sometimes direct some of the most successful live-action films of the 1980s. Some of his most notable works include 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Most of Hughes's work was set in Chicago, the same city where he grew up. He is best known for his coming-of-age teen comedy films with honest depictions of suburban teenage life. Many of his most enduring characters from these years were written for Molly Ringwald, who he described as his muse. In fact, while writing 16 Candles, John said he had a photo of Molly over his desk as he knew she was going to be the perfect actress to assume the role of his lead protagonist. Hughes is credited with launching the careers of many successful actors who became known as the Brat Pack, but including but not limited to Molly Ringwald herself, Matthew Broderick, Anthony Michael Hall, Chevy Chase, and Macaulay Culkin. On August 6, 2009, while on a walk in New York City, Hughes suffered a sudden massive heart attack and died. He was 59 years old. The legacy of John Hughes extended long past the 80s and continues well into film and television today. Here today to dive into the life and works of the late and great John Hughes, my good friend and fellow 80s superfan, Kelly Johnson. Kelly, how are you?
I am doing just fine. I was so excited when you asked me to do this podcast because you and I have talked about John Hughes numerous times. All the things he's done. And, I grew up in that era. And it really did. I mean, his movies had a big influence on a lot of people.
Yeah. So Kelly and I met at work back in, it had to have been like 2016, 2017. And
somewhere around there.
And we immediately discovered our mutual love of 80s movies, especially the John Hughes movies. And what we consider the core four. Now, not everyone is going to agree with us, obviously, but we, on our own, we did not plan this at all, but we collectively decided that the core four John Hughes movies are Pretty in Pink, 16 Candles, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and of course, The Breakfast Club.
Yeah, I mean, I just let me put in there real quick here. When I grew up with these movies and everything, and doing this rewatch was certainly an experience for me. And my opinion has changed on probably which one's my favorite, and some of the movies in terms of what they have in them. Just kind of the dialogue and some of the just the storylines and things are I view them a little differently now.
I 100% agree. So as I was doing this rewatch, I started with Pretty in Pink and then 16 Candles. Immediately cringe. I mean, I was cringing so hard at some of this dialogue. I am like, there is no way they would get away with saying some of the stuff that they were saying. I mean, I didn't even know. I didn't realize. I've seen these movies before. I've seen these. And it wasn't until rewatching these recently that I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they just said that. Like, I can't believe this is the dialogue in this movie. My note says, does not hold up well at all.
And the funny thing is, I mean, truly, at the time, nobody thought twice about a lot of it. I mean, that's the thing. Looking back on it, is it just
So for those of you who haven't seen any of these movies, this episode is going to be chock full of spoilers. So, stop now and go and rewatch at your own, will, like if you choose. So let's start with 16 Candles, since we both agree that was like the worst of them all. And it wasn't a bad movie.
Yeah.
It was just, the dialogue and some of the content. It was like, okay, this didn't work. It has two members of the Brat Pack. So do you want to go over what the Brat Pack is?
Yeah, I think we probably should.
So I obviously was not around when, the Brat Pack was formed. I just know the movies that they're in and the people who are considered members of the Brat Pack. Do you kind of remember like when it became known as the Brat Pack, or like was there
I mean, it was all up in like Teen Magazine and 17 and all that good stuff back in the day. But, basically it was, it really kind of started, even though it wasn't a John Hughes movie, it started with St. Elmo's Fire is when it really started.
Okay.
Which I told you before, I thought that was a John Hughes movie, and it is not.
So prior to this, we talked about a lot of movies that we thought were John Hughes, and they were not John Hughes movies.
It kind of started because Emilio Estevez, who is in the movie St. Elmo's Fire, agreed to do an article with Rolling Stone, I think it was. And so this person, the journalist was interviewing him and would come out and follow him around a little bit and just kind of, talk with him. They'd go out to dinner, whatever. So Emilio invited the journalist out and it was at the time, it was Rob Lowe and Judd Nelson and Emilio Estevez. They were all in St. Elmo's Fire, invited the journalist to go out with them one night in Los Angeles. But basically what happened was, this is where the name came from. The Judd Nelson and Rob Lowe were trying to kind of make Emilio kind of build him up a little bit or whatever. And so they were kind of playing up the, being stars and being movie stars and that kind of thing or whatever. And it came off to the journalist as a little bit egotistical and that sort of thing. And so it started with the St. Elmo's Fire group in terms of so he referenced them in this journal, in this article, as he called them the Brat Pack, essentially, because he thought they were acting like a bunch of brats. And when the article came out, everybody was kind of horrified. Because that was not the intention, and Emilio the article was originally supposed to be just about Emilio, but it became this whole bigger thing. So they kind of lived with that for a long time, unfortunately, and it probably somewhat affected some of their careers, to be honest with you. But at the time, like as a teenager at that time, though, like that's not how I saw it. Like I didn't see it as like a bad thing, but they were living it. Right. And so, with St. Elmo's Fire then, so it ended up being, St. Elmo's Fire is Rob Lowe, Emilio Estevez, Judd Nelson, Demi Moore, Ali Sheedy, the blonde who's in love with Rob Lowe. But I can't think of her name right now. Andrew McCarthy's in that movie too. So that's kind of where it started, that's how it started, was with that pack, with that group. But Mare Winningham, that's her name. And she was never really kind of part of that because she was already married and had kids when she made St. Elmo's Fire. So she wasn't like out on the town and whatever, but it was the other kind of 6 or 7 people that it started with. And then it expanded a little bit because they all ended up in the same movies. Like there was so much overlap between those characters and like characters in the John Hughes movies and throw in some Cameron Crowe with like Say Anything, throw in some of these other things, and you get a lot of overlap with these people who were in all these movies together. Even like Jennifer Grey and Charlie Sheen, and like the ones that you mentioned too. So it was kind of, it wasn't like a set group of people. It kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit in terms of who was considered in it, but it was kind of that group of people in the 80s that were in all these movies that kind of overlapped with each other.
According to, Wikipedia, because, reputable source of information. The Brat Pack members, the core Brat Pack members, Emilio Estevez, Anthony Michael Hall, Rob Lowe, Andrew McCarthy, Demi Moore, Judd Nelson, Molly Ringwald, Ali Sheedy. And then they have these honorable mentions: John Cusack, Jennifer Grey, Patrick Swayze, Leah Thompson, and for whatever reason, C. Thomas Howell.
Because he was in The Outsiders.
So the movies that they kind of overlap in that Kelly kind of mentioned: The Outsiders, Class, 16 Candles, Oxford Blues, The Breakfast Club, St. Elmo's Fire, Pretty in Pink, Blue City, About Last Night, Wisdom, Fresh Horses, and Betsy's Wedding. And in these movies, you will find at least 2 or 3 or more of these actors.
One other one that I want to point out too, which is the original Red Dawn. That was before even like Pretty in Pink and that kind of thing. It was released before 16 Candles. It was released the same year. But the original Red Dawn was like Patrick Swayze, Jennifer Grey, Tom Cruise. I think Matt Dillon was in it. Like there's still that overlap from even before when it was technically considered the Brat Pack, and when they started some of the John Hughes movies, like some of these people had acted together before, you had Patrick Swayze and Jennifer Grey acted together before Dirty Dancing.
Oh, right.
They were in Red Dawn together. So, you had some of this overlap. There was a lot of overlap with a lot of these same actors during the whole decade of the 80s.
And John Hughes was no stranger to using them in his movies. So when we come to 16 Candles, we have 2 members of the Brat Pack, Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall, who became really close with John Hughes after the filming of this movie. Now, prior to the podcast, Kelly and I, we both read a lot, and she brought this book to my attention. And the book, what's the name of that book, Kelly?
It's called You Couldn't Ignore Me If You Tried, which is a quote from The Breakfast Club, if you don't know that.
Right.
By Susanna Gora, Gora. But yeah, it's a great book.
Lots of background on John Hughes, the 80s movies, the Brat Pack, the whole deal. But one of the things that it does talk about is how he wrote 16 Candles for Molly Ringwald after seeing her in another film. And then Michael Hall, or Anthony Michael Hall, they talk about his audition in this book and how he got the role in 16 Candles. And after this movie, he and John Hughes become really good friends, and he shows up, all over the place in other John Hughes movies. 16 Candles is about Samantha Baker.
Yeah, Samantha Baker.
Her family forgets that it's her 16th birthday. So she wakes up, she's expecting, all this hoopla and hoorah and crickets. And the grandparents are coming into town because her sister's getting married. And like right out the bat, like when we get downstairs with grandma, she literally gropes her and says like, "Oh, look, honey, her boobies are coming in." And I was immediately like, okay, grandma is out of control.
I'm sorry, but I still die laughing at that scene because I can just feel Molly Ringwald's just like humiliation and embarrassment. Like, oh my God, did she just feel me up?
So in the film, she is...
I was going to say one other thing I wanted to point out with her and Anthony Michael Hall is they actually were teenagers when this movie was made. I mean, I don't even know if she was 16 yet. She was like 15, maybe going on 16 I think she was only like 15 when this movie was made. And Anthony Michael Hall was right around the same age. Like they were not adults when this was made. So I can only imagine, even being an actress, like I just can't even imagine. Like I just think about that. Like,
So the next controversial character that we meet is
Long Duck Dong.
And it is like so stereotypical, borderline racist. Like it's not good. The name is funny. The character is funny. It's funny, but at the same time, I'm like looking at this, I'm like, okay, this is like Cringeville, USA, but I'm going to muscle through it and just, make my way through. The whole point of the movie is Sam has a crush on a guy who she feels is way out of her league. And she is upset because her family has, forgotten her birthday, and she doesn't know where she fits in with her family. What were your thoughts on this movie?
And again, like I said, my thoughts have changed as I watch this as an adult compared to when I was younger. When I was younger, it wasn't a love story, but it was humorous, but it was, it was Jake Ryan, man. Jake Ryan was just it. He plays the love interest. He plays the senior, and Samantha's a sophomore. And, Jake Ryan has it all. Jake Ryan is just like, you talk about like an ideal man, and especially when you're a teenager, and like he is it.
I kind of felt like his character was like in the background a little bit.
He's written as the love interest in the story, but certainly the story is about Samantha Baker. And, it is called 16 Candles, and it is about like her family forgot her birthday. But that's not really what the whole film is about. I mean, the film, it does go into the wedding, but it's really a movie that is about how hard it is to be a teenager, how hard it is to be, that sort of not popular, but not really unpopular kind of character, like in school, which, I'll be honest. That's kind of where I fell into. Like, I wasn't super popular. I was a cheerleader, but it wasn't like, I wasn't super popular, but I wasn't like unpopular.
Right.
And so I kind of feel like she's a little bit in that range. And it's kind of what goes with it. And then once you throw Anthony Michael Hall in there, and he's just, honestly, I can't help it. I still adore Jake Ryan, but looking back on this movie, like Anthony Michael Hall in this movie, like just cracks me up.
He steals the show.
I agree with you completely. I think he is just such a great character, and for this being, one of his first movies that he did and that kind of thing, like it is really such a good role. And the way he plays it though too, I just think about some of the things like him. He's such an optimist, and he's so like, he's going after Samantha Baker, but she's all about Jake Ryan, and his character, even after he finds out that like she's into Jake Ryan and not into him, like then he's trying to help her get to Jake Ryan, and then Jake Ryan kind of works through him to get to her, and it's just he becomes that character that is just like, I don't know, and I still it makes me laugh too, like the whole when he asks her for her underwear, like like I just can't help but laugh at that too. I'm like, and then charges the boys $1 to see him.
It was like so on point. Like he realizes like, I don't have a chance with this girl at all. Hey, can I have your underwear?
Right. Like, at least let me make some money off of this.
And then at the end, when she finds out that people paid $1 to see her underwear, like, she's mortified. One of the funnier things was when Sam is in school and she's filling out that little quiz thing, and it was like, who would you do it with? And she puts Jake Ryan, and she like doesn't even turn around to like give it to her friend, just like puts the note over her shoulder, assuming her friend's gonna like grab it. Her friend is like knocked out. She's like asleep. And she just drops it, and it like it just falls on the floor, and Jake picks it up. And that's kind of when he realizes that, this girl likes him, and then he realizes that he likes her, and he's dating, this debutante
Caroline.
Who is cringy in her own right.
Oh yeah.
And I think the movie kind of, wraps up really nicely. I like the direction that it went.
I agree completely. And one thing I do want to add, when you were talking about her passing the note, I will tell you legitimately that was how it was done. Like we didn't have, we didn't have texting. We didn't have phones. Like, cause you had to be sly about it. You were trying to be sly about it. So she's stretching, and then just dropping it behind her back. And there's Jake Ryan so bored out of his mind. So he goes and grabs it.
Right. And just immediately sees what's on it. And then she leaves class and she's like, "Are you sure you don't have the note?" She's like, "No, I don't. I didn't even see the note." She's like, I don't know where it could have gone.
Oh, yeah. I'm with you, though. I'm a sucker for a happy ending, though. Jake Ryan goes and gets Samantha at the church, and she's like, he points to her. There he is with his red Porsche, and he's got on his sweater vest and everything else, and and she's standing in the doorway of the church, and he's like, "Come here," and she's looking behind her back, like, he's not talking to her, and then, and then he gives her the birthday cake with the 16 candles on it. So, I'm a sucker for a happy ending.
Yeah, I thought it wrapped up pretty good, especially with the Anthony Michael Hall scene with him and Carol in the car. And they're like, don't know what happened the night before. Totally clueless, totally 80s. That movie was, this was the first film that John Hughes wanted to do, and he did it specifically for Molly Ringwald. I think she was a great actress. She did really well. She presented that character very well. And it really goes to show like what a good actress she is as you see her in these other films, because she's different from this to Pretty in Pink to Breakfast Club. She's just completely different in every other movie. So let's kind of roll into Pretty in Pink next. This one also had two members of the Brat Pack, Andrew McCarthy and, of course, Molly Ringwald. This one's a little bit different than 16 Candles. So in this film, you have two kids from different sides of the tracks.
Literally.
Yeah, the Richies, and I forget what they call the poor kids, but I feel like she's going to a private school or some type of school on like the upper crusty side of town or something.
Yeah, I would agree with. I don't think it's I didn't get the feeling that it's a private school. It seemed to me it's just that it's the high school is in the wealthy area of town.
Yeah, so there's no way she could have afforded.
Yeah, it seems like it's just in the wealthy part of town.
And then we have basically the movie centers around her and her best friend Ducky. And in this film, her name is Andy. And her and Ducky are like best buddies. This movie gave me, I don't know why, but it gave me outsider vibes. And I don't know if it was because of the rich versus the poor type thing or what, but I definitely got outsider vibes. As a matter of fact, I feel like this movie was like a mashup of Outsiders and Breakfast Club. And I feel like there's some parallels between those two movies.
I would agree with you. I feel like it's the Outsiders without the fighting.
Right.
Like I feel like it's the same type of storyline. It's very similar. I would agree with you.
My favorite character in Pretty in Pink is Iona.
Annie Potts.
She plays Iona. She owns I don't know if she owns or she just manages.
Think she owns the record store, but I don't know. Yeah. I could be wrong.
I don't know. I think she owns it too. That's what my first thought was. It's the record store, and Andy works there after school. And Andrew McCarthy, he's also in this film. Annie Potts, I don't know why, but I feel like her character is like the mother figure that Andy needs and doesn't have because her mom, walked out on the family at some point before the film. But I just feel like her character was hilarious in every single scene she was in.
Yeah, I loved Annie Potts in this movie. I did. She was who she was. She wasn't worried about what anybody else thought, and she I mean, she did what she wanted to do. She was, a single woman who was dating, and she just, she wanted to try some new outfit. She tried the new outfit. Like, she just was her own person. Like, she truly, like, her character was, I don't know, like, that's just who she was. She had different personas, basically. Like, as, she tried on different personas as her, like, as that character. I mean, the character was that, sometimes it was a little quirky, sometimes it was a little more downplayed. Like, she was good.
And I feel like in every scene, like, she had a different hairstyle. Like,
yes.
she was like completely different in every single scene, but like the underneath, her character was the same. And I love that she was able to like just kind of commiserate with Andy, because she is struggling because she likes this guy, but he's rich and she's poor. And I like the vibe of her, kind of making her own outfits and like being her own character and like not caring that she's poor. She has this very nurturing vibe. She's taking care of her dad, who is still like, he has like PTSD from like, his wife walking out or whatever. But they have that scene together where they kind of come to terms with that they only have each other. And I thought that was a very, very beautifully written scene. I love that scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
I agree with you. I think it was very well written. I also think it was very well acted. You had, what's his name? Harry Dean Stanton plays the father. And, I mean, Andy she's struggling. I mean, she's struggling to figure out who she is, but she's also struggling because he is her only parent, because he's also struggling with the PTSD, and he's only kind of thinking about himself. And she's like, she walked out on me too, I mean, basically, and I don't think he ever thought of it that way. It was always that his wife walked out on him, not his wife walked out on their daughter.
Right.
So I agree with you. I think it's a pretty powerful scene, to be honest with you. As far as some John Hughes movies go, there, it's a lot of, there are some serious things, but it's not, I mean, I think it's something that his movies are, especially at that time, truly, I know some of them don't hold up as well now, but there are a lot of things that were, and I feel like there are some things that are still very relatable about his movies.
Absolutely. So Andrew McCarthy, he plays Blaine. He is Andy's love interest. And there's that scene where Blaine asks his friend, what do you think about Andy? And he's like, I don't think anything. Like, I don't really think about
she doesn't
her.
matter,
like,
basically.
Yeah, she's poor.
James Spader.
His character was, he played the character well, but that character really
sucked.
And then you have John Cryer, who is Ducky, who is Andy's best friend, who is also madly in love with her. I don't know. Do you think she's oblivious to the fact that he loves her, or?
I think it is probably I don't think she's oblivious to it. I think she's trying not to encourage him.
Okay, I can dig that. But he has zero qualms about showing, his love. And I remember that scene where they go to the club and he's outside talking to the bouncer because he can't get in. And the bouncer's like, if this girl loves you so much, why did she take you to a place where you can't get in?
Right. It was an excellent point by Andrew Dice Clay. Yeah, it's his character. I think this was the first time I really think, I was trying to think back that, I kind of knew who John Cryer was, based on his character as Ducky. And I thought he did an excellent job in that role too. I mean, it was one of those things, like, I think a lot of people, he could have come off as kind of a jerk, or like kind of, I don't know, if I feel like if it had been played by somebody else, or if he himself had played the role a little differently, it could have come off not as likable,
right,
of a character. But you kind of feel for the guy. Like, he does some things when Andy brings, what's his name to the club,
Blaine.
I mean, Blaine, it's a major appliance. And, he gets upset, and so he kisses Annie Potts and everything. He kisses Iona, in that, to try and, I don't know, try and make Andy jealous. I'm not really sure, but you can tell it's out of like hurt, like
Right.
he truly has now realized that she is not going to, come
But
to him.
Iona has already realized this. She knows
Right.
that he doesn't stand a chance, and she takes pity on him. And I really like that about her character.
Yeah, she does absolutely feel for him, and she's very empathetic for him and towards him. And it seems like it really is the first time that Ducky kind of realizes, like, he's not going to be her guy. Like, she does not see him that way.
Also, side point, I like that she worked at a place called Tracks, and she lived on the wrong side of the tracks. Just gonna throw that out there.
Nice.
John Hughes.
Didn't even think about that.
So with Pretty in Pink, John Hughes didn't direct this one. Howard Deutsch directed this one, but he wrote it. So you can kind of feel, you get that John Hughes vibe from the characters themselves. And the film is called Pretty in Pink, and one of the major plot points is Andy doesn't know if she wants to go to prom. She just, she's talking to Iona about it, like, I don't know if I want to go. It's just like a thing. Everybody does it. Why do it? And Iona kind of convinces her, like, if you don't go, you're gonna probably have the regret later on in life, like, oh, I wish I would have went to my prom. Like, and so she and Blaine eventually get together, and they're on a date, and things are going well. And at some point, things kind of fall apart. Blaine stops talking to her at school, and he stops returning her phone calls. And, she's like, what's going on? And then she confronts him in the hallway. It is a very, very poignant scene where she is like yelling at his face, like, are you still taking me to the prom? And he makes up that excuse about he'd already asked somebody else to go, and she is devastated. But I feel like he turns it around on her at one point and like makes her out to be the bad guy. I don't know. It gave me pause. But then she decides, she's going to go to the prom anyways. She goes to Iona, who has now found a new boyfriend who seems to be a really good guy. And now Iona looks like an actual person.
Iona looks like, because keep in mind some of the things that were on TV at the time. Every time I see that episode where Iona comes out in the white suit with the red shirt underneath or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Honest to God, the first thing I think of is Miami Vice.
Yeah, that outfit definitely has Miami Vice vibes to it, for sure. But then, she's really upset, and Iona, her date is waiting on her, but she's like, she gives her full attention to Andy.
Yeah.
And Andy's like, I'm still going to go to the prom. And she asks if she can, have her dress. Now, I don't know if it was like have or borrow or what, but Andy definitely took that sucker home and chopped it up.
Right. I was going to say, there's no giving it back. So
scene ripper and all, like that thing was done. And she puts together this dress from different, pieces of fabric that she has around the house, and the dress that she gets from Iona. And she goes to the prom, and she's walking down the walkway, and then she stops, and she's like, okay, this is stupid. I should not be going to the prom alone. Her 30 seconds of courage have been depleted, and she's like, maybe I shouldn't do this. And then Ducky shows up, and he's like, after they had this huge blowout, Ducky shows up, and that whole best friend thing. And John Hughes is really big on writing characters with best friends and showing that relationship.
Yes.
And they walk into the prom, and then her and Blaine eventually make up. Now, I don't know if you knew this or not, but in doing a little bit of research, in the original film, Andy and Ducky end up together.
I did not know that until very recently.
Yeah,
and apparently
so in the original,
very poorly received.
Yeah, so they showed it to test audiences and they absolutely hated it. So John Hughes ended up doing a 5-page rewrite in which Andy and Blaine end up, which is the ending that we see in the film. But he wanted to satisfy and tie up Ducky's character. So he brings in a new girl who is literally credited as Duckette in the credits. It's Kristy Swanson. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer, not Sarah Michelle Gellar, which was not a John Hughes movie and was cringe in its own rights.
Yes.
But it's Kristy Swanson, and this is her first theatrical role. And it is just like this sidebar character who looks at Ducky and they immediately, catch each other's eyes and kind of fall in love. And then,
right.
So he ties up Ducky's character. He ties up Andy and Blaine. And I thought it was a really good ending, but I kind of wish I would have seen the original ending. I don't know. Do you like this ending better, or would you have liked to have seen the other ending?
As a teenager, I liked the ending. As an adult, I wish she would have just ended up with neither of them.
I wish Ducky would have said, screw you. Like, you shattered my heart in a million pieces. I'm like moving on.
I'm fine with them staying friends, but she definitely shouldn't have ended up with him. But I wish she wouldn't have ended up with Blaine either, because Blaine treated her like trash.
He did.
Because of his friends. He couldn't stand up to his friends until the very end at the prom.
So that was Pretty in Pink, another great John Hughes movie. Highly recommend it. Again, we are going through the core 4. So we will touch on the other 2 films right after this break. Hey, this is JD from the Hyman Podcast, a place to have hard conversations revolving around the overall human experience. We tackle topics such as racism, the American justice system, and even headlining news such as the Alex Murdaugh saga. This season, we're going to continue to tackle more hard-hitting topics, and I'm excited to take you on that journey. The Hyman Podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. The Hyman Podcast is produced in conjunction with the Hyman brand and is part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
What's up, everyone? Chase Smith here, host of the Chase Smith Podcast, and my podcast reflects who I am. My hobbies, my interests, my passions, my curiosities, my careers, my questions, and my family. I'll spend time talking about all types of sports, movies, TV shows, trending news stories, and other cultural events, and even faith. This is who I am, and I hope I can get to know you as well. Join me on the Chase Smith Podcast, and let's have some thought-provoking conversations, only on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Welcome, everyone, to Podcast 616, the official podcast of Earth 616. I am your host, Damon Royster, and I am inviting you to listen and subscribe to this Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast. On Podcast 616, we gather some of today's greatest comedians, writers, and actors to dive deep into all things Marvel, like comic book history and lore, all the interconnected superhero storylines, and of course, who's hot and who's not in the MCU. Honestly, why aren't you listening right now? You have the power to listen to Podcast 616. And as we always say, with great power comes even greater responsibility. Listen and subscribe to Podcast 616 wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, Brooks here with the Books with Brooks monthly book club podcast. Here's how Books with Brooks works. We read one book a month, and then we talk about it. Classics like Stephen King's The Shining, debut novels like We Are the Brennans by Tracy Lang, and tons of other compelling, life-changing stories, one book and 1 month at a time. So come read along with us, and then listen in.
Hey everyone, this is Don Mike Mendoza, the host of Producing While Asian. Join us in Season 2 for more conversations with actors, artists, producers, and more from Broadway, Hollywood, and beyond, every other Wednesday on the Press Play Podcast Network.
We are excited to announce that we are joining the Press Play Podcast Network. The Krypton Report podcast is dedicated to all things Superman, Supergirl, and the planet Krypton. We discuss movies, TV, game, comics, and all things DC.
So join me, Tyler, with my co-host James and Jania.
So join us as we explore DC's multiverse.
Look for Krypton Report on all social media platforms.
Welcome back to the Fanfare Podcast. I'm here with my friend Kelly Johnson. We are going through the core four John Hughes movies, doing a profile on an amazing writer-director from the 80s. We just touched on Pretty in Pink and 16 Candles, and now we're moving on to Ferris Bueller and The Breakfast Club. Kelly, where do we start?
I'm going to start with Ferris Bueller.
I'm so glad you did.
You know, Ferris Bueller is one of those movies. That's another one, you know, when I was a kid, like, I loved this movie. I mean, the thought of skipping a day of school and going and doing, like, everything you could possibly think of, you know, for the entire day, just, you know, that was something as a kid, being in high school, you're just like, man, I wish I could do something like that. And so basically Ferris Bueller is a kid in, again, both these movies are going to be set in Chicago because that's where John Hughes grew up. This film is also set at Shermer High School, which was the high school in Pretty in Pink, I do believe. It was the same high school. And basically Ferris Bueller is played by Matthew Broderick. And this was the first John Hughes film that Matthew Broderick did. And Matthew Broderick was coming off of War Games that he had done a couple of years before with Ali Sheedy. And so, because I think War Games was 85, maybe 85 or 86. And so Ali Sheedy was in that one with Matthew Broderick. So he was kind of coming off of that. You know, his name was a little bit more well known. And by the time he got to this point, he had been on Broadway. He was doing some shows on Broadway, and he and Alan Ruck, who plays Cameron in Ferris Bueller, were on Broadway together. And so that's how they both ended up in this movie, because Matthew Broderick was cast first, and he wanted Alan Ruck to be his sidekick basically in the movie as well. So Ferris is a senior in high school, and his girlfriend, played by Mia Sara, Sloane, is a junior in high school, and she's in school. Cameron and Ferris both aren't in school that day. Cameron is kind of a bit of a hypochondriac, but he's laying in bed and thinks he's dying, and Ferris is his best friend. And Ferris fakes being sick. And his parents adore him and think he can do no wrong. And his sister, played by Jennifer Grey, just gets more and more irritated with him as the day goes on, because everybody in the town loves Ferris. Everybody knows Ferris, and she hates it. So, you know, as you kind of go through the movie, I will say basically, like, you know, they show scenes in the high school and everything else. And there's a scene where there's a guy who called him on a payphone because, again, no cell phones. So in high schools, you used to have payphones. So there's these three guys held around a payphone, and there's one guy on the phone. He's talking to Ferris on the phone and, you know, ask him how he's doing and everything. And it seems like Ferris just knows everybody because he has that outgoing personality. But in this particular case, it's that, you know, they're trying to find out how Ferris is doing. And the one guy makes the comment, and he's like, man, he's supposed to get me out of summer school. He's like, I can't handle summer school. And it's just things like one of the things Ferris famously says after everybody in the house is gone and he's not really sick, but he's, you know, getting ready to go out for his day and everything. One of the things is that he says, you know, he wanted a car for his birthday, but he got a computer, you know, which at that time was, you know, it's clear they come from like an upper middle class family. Because at that time, a computer was not cheap. And it's not that they're cheap now, but it was definitely not cheap then. But his sister actually did get a car.
Yeah, he has two working parents in this film, and based on what the mom is wearing, she seems like, you know, she has a pretty important job. And
she's in real estate.
And she does bring that up when she's at the end, when she's picking up, you know, her daughter from the police station. But
yes.
Oh, also to note, no members of the Brat Pack are in this film.
You are correct. I would say closest would be Jennifer Grey and maybe Charlie Sheen, who is the brother of Emilio Estevez and the son of Martin Sheen.
Who was our favorite president.
Right, of course. So I would say they're probably the closest in that. I mean, maybe Matthew Broderick a little bit, but not really. So those are kind of it. You had some of these people that were kind of in the group of the Brat Pack, like kind of a little bit on the satellite of the group pack, like right at the Brat Pack, like right on the outside, at that time. So basically Ferris fakes being sick, gives the advice on how not to do it. And then everybody leaves for the day and he goes about his business, calls up Cameron and says, hey, get up, we're going out. They makes Cameron call the school so that his girlfriend can get out of school also. And there are some things in this movie as well that are a little bit cringe. And mainly I'm thinking of when he goes to pick up Sloane at school. He has Cameron's. The whole thing with Cameron is that Cameron's dad famously, Cameron says that his dad loves the car more than he loves Cameron.
Right. It's a 1961 Ferrari 250 GT.
Ferrari, that's what it is.
Yeah. It's a big deal.
Yeah. So he makes Cameron basically like bring that car because, Principal Rooney wouldn't believe that Sloane's father drives, the piece of crap car that Cameron drives.
Right.
So they go pick her up, basically saying that there's a dead grandmother, and you have Edie McClurg as the secretary who's pulling pencils out of her hair because she showed up to the casting with that beehive, and that's where they came up with like shoving the pencils in there because John Hughes was essentially like, how many pencils can you fit in there? So she just kept shoving pencils in and then pulling them out. She's hysterical in this role.
I love her character in this movie.
Yeah, she's great. She really is. I wish there would have been a little bit more of her, to be honest with you, and a little less of Principal Rooney. But yeah, so they go pick up Sloane, and there's a kiss between Ferris and Sloane. But of course, the principal thinks that Ferris is her father, and so there's that's a little cringe in that section because then nothing else is done. He's like, "Oh, well, that's how it is in their family," and like that's it. I'm like, okay, just let that go. But so then essentially they go down into downtown Chicago. They go to this fancy restaurant and he passes himself off as the Sausage King of Chicago, Abe Froman. They go to a baseball game. They go the Art Institute, which is, I have been there. And it is pretty fantastic. And I went long after this movie. And so that's all I could think about, though, when I was in there and had that soundtrack like in my head, that music in my head when I was there, because that poster that the painting that Cameron stares at for so long until you can see the individual dots that the painter did.
Right.
It is like you see this picture and it's like that's the only thing I could think of. Was that
right?
I think this was kind of John Hughes's his last sort of teenage film. The last movie he kind of did about teenagers. I think it was a really good film for the time, and the fact that Ferris then also was kind of joined in the parade and ended up on a float, and
the Von Steuben Day Parade, Twist and Shout.
And Donkashane, and it really is a very entertaining movie.
Yes, from start to finish.
From start to finish, it's very entertaining. Matthew Broderick was great in this part. Like, I can't even picture, in reading that book we were talking about there, it goes through like a lot of the potential actors who were going to play some of these parts. And I just can't picture, and I can't remember who it was that was originally going to play Ferris, but whoever it was, I was just like, I can't even picture that. It's so tied to Matthew Broderick too, and he was just such a great person for this role. And Alan Ruck as his sidekick. was just a great choice. And, certainly Mia Sara was not well known or anything, but she was a great pick for this because she was a little bit more than like just your all-American girl next door. She had a little bit kind of that exotic little, but it wasn't that like blonde haired, blue eyed, like kind of standard that a lot of people were using, or that, sort of just cute.
Right.
I mean, she was beautiful, and she was a little bit kind of exotic in her features. And, so I think it was that there were a lot of things about it that were very entertaining. There were a lot of things about it that were really good. And there were a few that were a little bit cringe, but.
And I feel like this movie kind of like it builds up, and then there's like a peak, and then we come right back down. And it's like when he's ready to go home, he's like, I want to go home. And Ferris is like, cool, let's go home. And the whole plan was we were going to put the car in reverse to get the miles off of the odometer. And so they're sitting in Cameron's house. They have the car in reverse up on a brick, and it's just like going full speed in reverse. And they're just kind of like, talking things out. And that's kind of when Cameron kind of comes to terms with the fact that he is never going to please his father.
Yeah.
And ends up kicking the Ferrari off of the jack in the brick, and it goes flying out the window. And
down the hill.
There's like, yeah. I don't know why they destroyed that car, but there's like this moment of like fear. And then he's like immediately comes to terms, like whatever happens.
Right.
Like, I don't care. And that is at that point, Ferris, he has to get back home. So he is like, running through backyards and jumping over fences and running through houses. And his sister's trying to beat him home so she can prove to her mom that he is actually like not sick. And Mr. Rooney is like on his tail. Like everybody is like trying to catch Ferris in the act. And I love at the very end when he gets home and his sister catches him, and then she realizes that Mr. Rooney is there too, and she's like, okay, who do I hate more? Like,
right.
Ferris or Mr. Rooney?
Yeah. And, and I think the thing with her relationship with Mr. Rooney obviously stems too from the fact when she came home and, because she left school early because she was just mad. She was mad.
Right.
And, this is all how she ends up in the police station too. Is because then Mr. Rooney breaks into the house. She hears somebody in the house, and she goes and downstairs and basically like does some high kick nonsense and knocks him out or whatever, and then calls the police, and they think she's making a phony phone call, saying someone's in the house, because she'd gone downstairs because there was a flower delivery and a singing telegram, and and she's had it, and so then she kicks him in the face, and so she ends up down at the police station, which honestly, this is one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. Is her and Charlie Sheen sitting on that couch, and he's talking to, he's there for drugs, and it's very evident just by how he looks, and and he's like, and she's talking about why she's there, because he's trying to guess why she's there, and so she finally tells him why he's there, and about her brother and everything else, and he's like, why do you care if he's skipping school? Like it was
right.
This whole just kind of like moment where he's like, I don't get it. But it was just and the fact that they had him end up making out by the time she left, like that just kills me.
Like, let's go. Let's get out of here. And then in the tag, you have Mr. Rooney. He is like, he's been like eaten up by, some dogs, and he looks destroyed. And then like, he gets on the school bus And he is just a mess. And I just love that scene where, he just gets on the bus and sits down and she shuts the door and she just drives off. And then Ferris gets away with it. He gets away with it.
Absolutely gets away with it. And Cameron's a better person for it. And Sloane's a better person for it because Ferris wants to marry her. And, the other thing, too, is then when his parents do get home, one of the things that always makes me laugh, too, though, is, and I kind of have a question about this, though. Like when they get home, there are literally flowers that have been sent from apparently everyone in their town because they're all over the house. But my question is, how did all the flowers get there? I know that's one of those side notes where it's like, just let it go. But I'm like, how did they all get there if nobody was home? Two other things I want to mention real quick. So in the scene with Ben Stein, famous for the Bueller. One of the other things I learned recently was that part was scripted, but he and John Hughes were good friends. And so that scene where he does the whole thing where he's speaking about the voodoo economics and all that stuff, that was just Ben Stein. Like just talking seriously, because he's done all kinds of, like economic stuff. Like he's very, very intelligent. That was just him kind of talking. John was like, just talk about economics and whatever. And so that's what came out. And in that scene also, the girl who is, when he calls for Bueller and he's like, Bueller, and the girl who speaks up and, the one who's like, well, my best friend's sister's boyfriend's cousin said that they saw Ferris at 32 Flavors and whatever it is, that whole thing that she says, that is also Christy Swanson.
Yes, another Christy Swanson. Buffy makes a second appearance. Just a really small role, like no big deal. But yeah, like another Chrissy Swanson. Not a member of the Brat Pack, but she should get honorable mention or something at this point. So, and
the other thing is, this was the first time I also think I saw, and I didn't notice it the first time. One of my brothers was the one who pointed this out because I didn't stay like through the credits because at that time you didn't like the credits started rolling and you just left. Like there wasn't any expectation there would be anything else like after the credits rolled.
Right.
But this was the first time that I then remember seeing after my brother pointed out, because I saw this in the theater probably a couple of times, 2-3 times, because it was just funny. Where Ferris, have you watched through to the end of the credits, like through the credits in this movie?
I don't think so. I mean, I've watched.
Matthew Broderick comes back out. Like Matthew Broderick is in his robe and comes out of the bathroom and I think he has a towel on it. I'm trying to think if he still has a towel on his head. But walks out and he kind of peeks his head around the outside the door of the bathroom and he's like, "You're still here?" He's like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "Go home."
Yeah, he breaks the fourth wall.
Yes. That was one of the first times I ever saw like that after credits sort of like scene. I don't know if it had been done before that, but that was the first time I saw it in any movie.
That is Ferris Bueller. If you have not seen it, Ferris Bueller is one of my favorites just because of the vibe. It's just upbeat, it's very positive. I don't think there were any it wasn't like too cringy at any point in the film, but I think that was one of John Hughes' best works. I really enjoy that movie. And then the last but not least, the cream of the crop, The Breakfast Club. This one was written and directed by John Hughes.
Yes, it was. Again, rewatching all these movies, like as a teenager, I think my favorite movie probably would have been Pretty in Pink. I was trying to remember back like what it was that I liked probably the best. As an adult, it's The Breakfast Club for sure. Without a doubt. Without a doubt, it's The Breakfast Club.
Side note, Kelly and I, every March, will send each other that meme of like the front of the school when it's like 30 some years ago, like 5 kids met here for detention. I don't know how many years it's been at this point, but that
I'm saying Breakfast Club was 1985, and it was the only one of his movies at that time that was rated R also, because the other, even like 16 Candles, which got changed to a PG-13. PG-13 didn't exist until after Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Oh. I was not
That
aware
was
of
when
that.
it was actually suggested. Steven Spielberg was the one who suggested a PG-13. So that's when it came out, because before then it was either like PG or R. Like that was it.
Wow. Did not know.
So I think Red Dawn, as a matter of fact, I have it written down here. I think Red Dawn was the first movie that was PG-13. A little bit of trivia for you.
Yeah. Breakfast Club came out February 7th. February 15th is when it went wide. It had a $1 million budget and it brought in $51.5 million at the box office. And this one has 5 members of the Brat Pack: Anthony Michael Hall, Emilio Estevez, Judd Nelson, Ali Sheedy, and of course, Molly Ringwald.
Yes.
Let's just do a quick plot analysis or summary of
Quick rundown.
Quick rundown. Go for it.
Okay. So essentially what it is all these kids got detention for one reason or another, which we'll, probably touch upon some of that. But they all got detention. All 5 of them got detention. The detention is in the library of Shermer High School. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. It's at the same school. They all go into detention. The principal basically has to be there too, and he's given them an assignment. He's kind of a douchebag, to be honest with you. That's his character. And he's given them an assignment. They have to be there for 8 hours. And, they're not supposed to basically move. They're not supposed to do anything. He has given them an assignment that they have to write an essay about why they think they're there. And basically the whole movie is set in those 8 hours, and the majority of the movie is filmed in the library. Almost the whole movie is in one room.
And that was one of the points of contention they had about filming this movie before, because 16 Candles had already this was written before 16 Candles, but they didn't know how a movie filmed in one location would work or be received. So they went ahead and put Candles out first. So that was another little point of trivia that I found out about.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, there are a lot of interesting things about that. That again, I would recommend if anybody wants more information about any of this stuff to read the book we mentioned, towards the beginning of the podcast. Basically, so you have, Molly Ringwald plays the princess. Basically, she's in the very popular kids at school, and she's homecoming queen and whatever. Emilio Estevez is an athlete, and he's a wrestler. Anthony Michael Hall is the geek. He's essentially, smart kid, good grades, parents together, little sister, just family.
Right.
Ali Sheedy is sort of the quirky outsider.
The basket case.
Yes, the basket case. I couldn't think of what they were calling her. And then Judd Nelson. Judd Nelson is what did they title him as? You remember?
The criminal.
Yeah, basically. And so he is the kind of also a little bit of a social outcast among the popular people, but it seems like amongst his friends and stuff, he probably is top of the heap amongst like some of the, that sort of crowd.
Yeah. And with this group, he's definitely like the detention repeat offender, like without a doubt. Right.
This
is not his first rodeo.
Absolutely. Because he then also earns himself like another 2 months in detention within the next,
within 5 minutes of being in there,
of being in the room to begin with. So yeah, he plays Bender. And one other thing I learned was apparently he is one of those actors that, at the time was into method acting. And so he tried to stay in Bender's character, but apparently he was just pissing people off. So they were like, yeah, just stop it. Just stop. So yeah, I found that interesting too. But so yeah, so they're all in this room, and the whole plot of the movie, and it sounds kind of, when you say it out loud, it doesn't sound that interesting, to be honest with you. The whole plot of the movie is essentially how they kind of get to know each other a little bit more, and they sort of learn that all of them, have their stereotypes of what they think everybody else is, and they learn that a lot of them are just wrong or incomplete.
But they all come from different, socioeconomic backgrounds. They all come from different school backgrounds. And the whole point of the movie is how these 5 kids who all have these different social circles kind of wind up in the same room and then realize that they're more alike then they're different. The entire time they're in detention, Bender is just doing these random things, which arguably will get them in more trouble. And they are attempting to get him to chill out. But like the more they try and talk him down from his random acts of I won't say violence, but just
delinquency.
his random acts of delinquency, he just does more and more. They end up sneaking off and getting marijuana from his locker, and then they come back, they all get high, and then they get in this circle where they proceed to talk about themselves, their backgrounds, why they're in detention. And it's just this really authentic scene about teen angst. And what I learned in general was that this scene was largely ad lib.
Yeah, which is pretty unbelievable.
Yeah. And John Hughes just kind of just told him to go for it. And I don't know. It's like one of the most powerful scenes in the entire movie. And I cannot, for the love of me, understand how they were able to do that.
Yeah, it's very genuine. And there are parts of it that kind of break your heart, truly, you know, and when Ali Sheedy, when they're talking about growing up or whatever, and, you know, Ali Sheedy makes a comment about how when you become an adult, your heart dies. You know,
Right.
And it's just heartbreaking. And you're just like, oh my gosh, you know, and Judd Nelson is all over Molly Ringwald's character during part of this too, trying to get her. Really what it comes down to is it kind of seems like he's really trying to get her to take a look at herself and really to be honest with herself about who she is or how she treats people and that kind of stuff. And it's kind of heartbreaking too, because I look at all of these characters, and for me personally, I feel like I could identify almost with something with all of them.
Right.
You know, individually. And it's, I don't know. Like I said, as an adult, it is definitely my favorite movie.
There's this penultimate moment in this scene where Anthony Michael Hall's character, Brian, reveals why he was in detention. I think that was one of the most incredibly done parts, just his acting in that scene alone, and the way the other students kind of react to him just reveals so much about his character and his ability to portray this part. And when he asks Molly Ringwald, like, will we be friends tomorrow?
Yeah.
And like, it is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That whole scene was really, really, really well done. I think John Hughes just did a masterful part at not only writing and directing this, but also casting it. Everybody in this film portrayed those characters so well. I think it just speaks volumes of, you know, their ability as actors and his ability as a writer and director. And then, you know, the whole point of them being, well, not the whole point of them being in detention, but the principal, played by Paul Gleason, he gave them that task to write the essay, Who Do You Think You Are? Rather than write the essay, they employ Brian to write an essay for all of them because they feel like he can best represent what they want to convey, even though I do feel like they just kind of want him to do all the work. Like,
oh, I agree with you completely. I think he would have been the most eloquent at it, but I also think that when Claire asked him to do it, it was solely because she was trying to get them all out of doing it.
All right. She did not want to do that at all. And they're like, yeah. You can do this. Yeah, you're perfect for this.
Right. Thinking back on that scene where they're all sitting kind of in that circle too, it's the, part of it for me too is when Brian asked the question about, mainly to Claire and Andrew, if they'll still be friends on Monday. And, right or wrong, Claire is very honest and is like, probably not. And I think it says something, though, about their different cliques and everything, and how it would not be acceptable with their friends if they were nice to him. But, then Brian is like, I wouldn't do that. If I were to see you, he's like, I wouldn't just ignore you or whatever.
Right.
And again, it's not that this is untrue, but it's the fact of saying this out loud. It just is so, it was true, but it was also mean, when then Claire says basically, yeah, but that's because, basically because it's a step up for him to be friends with them rather than for them to be for him to be friends with Claire than for Claire to be friends with him.
Right.
That basically it's like, well, of course you would, because it would be, and it just... And honestly, I feel like probably not a whole lot has changed, if you were to go into any high school or anything these days.
I do not disagree at all. I'm fairly certain it is still the same way, if not worse. But kids can be cruel. But, with John Hughes, one of his big things is making films that are authentic to the teen experience. And I think that's why I love Breakfast Club so much, is because it's one of those movies that everybody who watches this movie can relate to one of those 5 characters in some fashion or another. And being able to see everybody's different points of view kind of speaks volumes, because now they have an inside look at what everybody's social circle is like. They know Claire Standish as the princess, but she is just representative of an entire group of people just like her.
Yes.
And the same with Andrew, and the same with Bender. Now, Ally Sheedy, I don't know what in the world. I know they call her the basket case, but I don't even... I think that is like, maybe she was like what we would call emo today.
Kind of, I guess. Like she
is in her.
She's pretty
world.
much there because she's pretty much there because she's bored and her parents don't pay attention to her. Like there's no reason she's there.
I totally forgot that she wasn't in
trouble for anything. She needed something to do.
She was just along for the ride. So she decided to spend 8 hours of her Saturday in detention. For no reason.
Right. I will say, too, when Emilio Estevez goes into his story about why he was there, and it was essentially because he taped together the butt cheeks of one of the kids, some weaker kid in the locker room, because his friends were egging him on to do it. And then Brian, it kind of, I don't know if Brian was friends with the kid or whatever, but he obviously knew this kid, because Brian was like, that was you. And it strikes me that it seemed like it was probably a pretty big school that he might have heard something about it, but it was more, I kind of got the feeling he might have either known the kid or was friends with him or something. Bender's in there for various reasons. And then I think the reasons they're in there are very indicative of their characters too, because, Claire was in there because she decided to ditch school and go shopping. And then in the scene with her dad, when he drops her off, he's basically like, he doesn't really care, but he just is like, yeah, well, maybe you shouldn't go shopping during school. It's not that big of a deal. It's just, and it's then you have, as they're dropping them off, and then you have Brian, whose mom is basically like, you have 8 hours, you need to study, you need to get good grades and blah, blah, blah. And you can see just even from the beginning, when they're being dropped off, except for Bender, who of course doesn't really get dropped off. He just kind of appears.
Yeah.
But the other 4, basically, you see it from the beginning, kind of what their home life is a little bit like. Because you got Andrew, whose dad is Mr. living his life through his kid, who is a wrestling hero, superstar, and hands him a huge, grocery bag full of food for his lunch. You have Claire, whose dad hands her obviously something purchased from a store in a little bag, which turns out to be sushi, which, come on. Honest to God, there was sushi in that bag for 5 hours and but that's a whole nother topic. But then you have Brian, who's dropped off by his mom and his sister, who, by the way, are his mom and sister in real life.
Did not know that.
That was his actual family. And then I don't know if you noticed at the end, when he gets picked up, John Hughes is driving the car, playing his dad.
What? I had no idea.
It's John Hughes. And go to the very end of that. If you watch it, John Hughes is who picks him up.
Wow. Definitely got to go rewatch this. At least that scene. I'm going to rewatch it again just to see that.
It is. It's like kind of like a profile kind of view or whatever. You don't get like a full on shot, but it's like, it's John Hughes, so you see it from the beginning. And then like Ali Sheedy's character, she gets dropped off and like she gets out of the car and she goes to turn to say something to whichever parent dropped her off and the car just drives off.
Gone.
Gone. So from the very beginning, you kind of get a grasp of like what their home life is like, like what maybe that's what kind of helped form their lives and who they are. You get that straight from the beginning, which I also found very interesting. But you don't I didn't really pick that up until, of course, you watch the movie because you don't know that that's what it's coming to.
And I love that the movie buttons itself up in similar fashion by picking the kids up from detention. And you can kind of see the stark difference when they were dropped off versus when they get picked up.
Yeah.
Bender kissing Claire and Andrew and Allison. I don't know how that relationship even came about because, she was in there putting chips on her sandwich or whatever, or just live
Claire
her best
gave
life.
her the makeover. Which also I have a little bit of an issue with, but go ahead.
Plastic makeover. Every teen movie has to have that makeover scene.
Yeah.
And it just happened to be, and they realized, oh, it's a person and not a Muppet,
Right.
Yeah, and so the movie kind of closes out with Bender leaving school the same way he got there, on foot. Classic scene. Him walking through the football field, throwing his fist up in the air, and the song by Simple Minds, Don't You Forget About Me, playing. One of the most iconic scenes in movie history. I'm throwing that out there. Super iconic scene. I mean, he's just like pushing his fist into the heavens in defiance. I mean, because, he's going to be back next week anyways, because he's got 12 more detentions or whatever. Awesome movie. Awesome soundtrack, even. That song, Don't You Forget About Me, it actually peaked at number 1 on the Billboard 200 chart when it was released back in 1985.
Yeah, and the funny thing was they didn't want to even do it.
Breakfast Club definitely goes down in history as one of the most iconic movies of the 80s. I think when people think of the 80s and 80s movies, The Breakfast Club is one of the first films that people think of. It has been called the quintessential film of the 1980s. It ranks on all kinds of greatest movies or all kinds of lists and things. And while it should be number 1 on every list, I have seen it as high as 12 on some. Clearly, some psychopaths are out there. We can't expect everyone
Clearly, everyone does not agree with us.
But yeah, it was a great movie. It had a great cast. I loved everything about this movie.
I did too. And I think, just as a general statement, you had with this movie and with the other ones that he did, he was very good with, the teenage genre. And as far as treating teenagers as their own separate entity and not, as part of an adult film or something like that. Like these were the movies that focused on teens, and you had some before that, but it was stuff like, I think the one that comes closest that was before this was probably Fast Times at Ridgemont High. John Hughes did a very excellent job of, kind of portraying that sort of thing. And he was a fairly new director, and he took, there were a lot of people that worked with him in those early years that went on to become famous after that fact. So there were a lot of people involved in a lot of these movies, and he just kind of brought a lot of people along with him, and this isn't all he did, but I think this is what he's most well known for, is stuff like this.
For sure. So just kind of wrapping it up, March coming up, 2024 is going to be the 40th anniversary. This has been a profile on John Hughes, the amazing work that he did, the impact his movies have had on literal generations, and the film industry itself. I mean, he's one of those writers that had a very particular vision and executed it flawlessly again and again and again. And I think the core for us, I think they're some of the most important movies of the 80s just because of the content and what they're about and how they're so relatable to a lot of different people. So Kelly, thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to the 80s. This has been amazing, and I am so grateful that you were able to. Thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me do this. I was so excited when you asked me to do this. So I can, because I know we could talk about this for like 4 hours, really, but thank you.
Please subscribe to the Fanfare Podcast. Check out pressplaypodcast.com if you have not already done so. Check out my other podcast, the Hyman Podcast, also part of Press Play Podcast Network. And we will see you in the next episode.